Welcome back to the Wizard Shop. We're going to talk about this Audi S6, why it's in the shop, and see if you guys can figure out what's wrong just from the symptoms and what the customer reports right after this. This is a 2007 Audi S6 with the 5.2 liter V10. It's a very special car. They're very rare. And if you check in some of my previous videos, you'll see that I actually used to own one. They're a really cool car. And if you modify the exhaust, it sounds amazing, just like in this clip right here. Do you want to hear a really glorious, beautiful sound? Are you ready? Here we go. I don't currently own a car like this anymore. This is a customer's car. The one that I had has been sold and moved on down the road. We're going to open the hood. I'll talk about the engine a little bit, and then I'll tell you guys why it's here. Here's the 5.2 liter V10 that I just talked about. It's an Audi engine. And although this identical engine is not found in Lamborghinis, it is pretty much a Lamborghini engine. The core, the block, and things of that nature is the way, as far as it's designed, the dimensions, it's pretty much a Lamborghini engine. Now, Lamborghini uses a different set of heads, intakes, maybe some different materials, what the parts are made out of. But it's essentially a Lamborghini engine. A lot of people will argue it's not a Lambo engine. If you hear an Aventador taking off with nice exhaust, it sounds identical to this engine. It is basically the same engine. Now, a customer brought it here because it's misfiring and it was leaking oil really bad along the valve covers. It was smelling like burned oil. The oil leak and also the misfire is a common issue with this engine. And there are multiple reasons that cause the misfire. But the oil leak is usually the valve covers, and it drips down onto the exhaust. And you can smell it in the vents when you have the AC on. And it just smells really bad. It's a really strong odor.
Car Wizard, is that a fire hazard?
It could be, especially if it were excessive amount of oil and you got the engine really hot, you were racing it. It's possible that it could catch on fire. It needs to be addressed if it's leaking that bad, or really if it's leaking at all. Now, this customer brought his own parts. He had self-diagnosed it, and he was hoping that would take care of the issue. He brought his own valve cover gaskets, and he brought his own spark plugs. He had hoped that those two procedures being done to this engine would solve his misfire. Unfortunately, for the most part, it did not. Now, the oil leak, like I said, is a common issue. He was right about the valve covers. We got that fixed, and the oil leak is gone. But the misfire is still there. There's 4 reasons why these will misfire. Number 1 is that oil is leaking out of the valve covers into the spark plug holes and just making it short out. It's sparking through the oil. Number 2 is an actual misfire from the coil or the spark plug itself, a failed plug or a failed coil, which is also could happen. Number 3, the intake ports on the heads themselves get extremely coked up with carbon in these engines. It is the bane of the existence of any Audi S6 or S8 owner with this engine. It just constantly happens and happens. Every 50,000 miles, you're just really supposed to pull the intake off and clean it out. There are guys that put additives or sprays or things into the intake every so often to try and clean it out, and I've never seen that work. Eventually it clogs back up again and has to be manually cleaned by hand, each intake port. If you look in this picture right here, you can see with the intake removed, each of the intake ports, it just clogs up around the valves, and the valves don't close all the way, they don't seal anymore. It gets caked so heavily with carbon. Number 4 is the injectors themselves, which are, you have to pull the intake to get to them. This is direct injection. The injectors spray directly into the combustion chamber, not into the intake. That's why the intakes tend to coke up on these. So I'll give you guys a few seconds with what you've been told. What would be the problem here? What would you do? Would it be 1, 2, 3, or 4? What would be the avenue that you would take? Take a few seconds and think about that. What would you do with this car? So as I just mentioned, he supplied his own plugs and valve cover gaskets. We pulled the coils out, and the spark plug holes, or wells as some people call them, were truly filled, half filled with oil. And it would be easy to say, it's a eureka moment. You're like, yeah, that's it. That's totally why this is misfiring. It makes sense now. So we put all new plugs in, cleaned out the spark plug wells, cleaned off the coils. We put the new valve cover gaskets on to stop the oil leak and put it all back together. Number 3 and number 4 are misfiring still. I was able to determine the misfire and where it's coming from with my Autel MS908 scan tool that I use quite heavily in this shop. And I saw, okay, so number 3 and number 4 are misfiring, which is this cylinder and the one back there behind it. So the first thing that I did is I took those 2 coils out of their spark plug holes and I switched them with 2 on the other side. If the coils were the culprit, the misfire would have now moved over to that side, or something would have changed at least. But it did not. So I cleared the codes, I went and drove it and came back. The computer was like, I don't care what you just did. It's still number 3 and it's still number 4. So I said, okay, I'll pull the actual spark plugs out. Maybe the plugs are bad. They're brand new, but who knows? I pulled them out, made sure they were GAT, made sure there's no cracks in the porcelain. I switched them with 2 plugs that were on the other side. Cleared the codes, went for a drive again. I can feel that it's still misfiring. And the computer says, again, I don't care what you just did. It's still number 3 and still number 4 is misfiring. When I saw that after doing those 2 procedures, I knew this is either the valve's not sealing or an injector is not firing. As this engine warms up, it gets a little better. The misfire kind of goes away. And I knew at that point, from experience, from having one of these, that my car did the same thing. The car that I had was actually used and filmed in the reality show that me and Hoovie filmed. Actually, it was Hoovie's show, but I was in it. An Audi S6 that was purchased and used for the show. And most of the time through the filming, it was misfiring and acting up, and they brought it to the shop and asked me to diagnose it. I pulled the intake off and verified. They were carboned up really bad. I mean, the valves were just, they looked like little beehives. They were coked with carbon. I would drive this car before I had taken it apart, and when it was cold, it would miss out really, really bad. And as it warmed up, it would start to get a little better and actually kind of smooth out. And which is exactly what this one is doing. So based on what I've already been through and what this is exhibiting, I can say with a 90% assurance that the valves are coked up really bad and causing the misfire. It could be injectors. When I had taken apart the car that I had, I pulled the 2 injectors. They came out of the cylinders that were missing and tested them, and they were kind of weak. They weren't bad, but they were a little weak. And since we were that far into it, it makes sense to replace all 10 injectors. And we did. Because I told the film crew, we don't want to do this again and take it back apart and take it back apart. Let's just get the injectors replaced, clean the intake ports, everything properly done, go back together with it, we're done. It'd be kind of like the water pump on the timing belt video that we just did. You don't pull the timing belt off and leave the old water pump, because when it starts leaking in 6 months, you get to pull the timing belt off all over again. This is called while you're there work. You might as well just go ahead and do it. So the customer had brought it here and thinking that those parts that he brought would solve this issue. Unfortunately, it did not, and he is not at the point right now that he wants to put a whole bunch of money into it. And with the current situation we're going through right now with the economy, I don't blame him. It's not the time to burn through thousands of dollars. And you say, Car Wizard, thousands of dollars? Oh yes, this engine will eat up thousands of dollars very fast. Let me explain why. So the issues that we just talked about with the injectors and the intake cleaning and coils and plugs and valve cover gaskets. So you would think, okay, I could see $1,500. We'll get that taken care of. And you couldn't be more wrong. Try $4,000 before tax. Each of those injectors are $100 each, times 10. We're at $1,000, and all we did was buy the injectors. We haven't even taken it apart yet. We're already at $1,000. So I'm not going to pull your intake off and clean each individual port, which takes a lot of time, for 200 bucks. It's going to be another $1,000. Now that would include most of the labor to get down to the injectors, because I'll already have the intake off. You would just have roughly another hour or so to pull all the injectors and put the new ones in. So now we get to the valve covers, spark plugs, and that right there is going to be another $700–800. Each of those plugs are about $10–12 a piece. You don't want to put cheap plugs in this engine. Times 10, remember everything's times 10 on this. So you got the labor, the valve cover gaskets, the spark plugs, cleaning, all that stuff is another $800 or $1,000. So we're getting close to $3,000. And now you might need some coils. These are known, these Audi coils, whether they're on Lamborghinis, whether they're on an Audi, a Volkswagen, these things drop like flies. They fail at about 100,000 miles without fail. So let's say you had to replace all 10 of these at $100 a piece. There's your next $1,000. $4,000 to get a tune-up, coils, clean the intake, new injectors, and get this thing in tip-top shape. And guess what? You still may have issues, because inside of this little turtle shell looking intake is a bunch of plastic flaps that open and close at different RPMs to change the airflow. And it is known that they break and they don't work anymore. And it makes it start to misfire as well. This intake by itself is $2,000, and there is no aftermarket. There is no repairs for the intake. You can't buy the individual parts. If you go to the Audi forums, you will see over and over again the same phrase: I had to bite the bullet and buy the intake. I had to bite the bullet and buy the intake, over and over. There is no other way around it. Some people gut the innards out of the intake and just run it that way. You lose some low-end power, but it works. It does the job. But that's just on the top of this engine. We have between $4,000 and $6,000 already. If you have major issues around the engine, there is a lot of things on this car that are engine out. Let's take a look at this Ferrari 550. If you look at this V12 engine, it's longer and somewhat larger than the V10 we're looking at over there, but there is tons of room around it. If I remove these air boxes and these intake elbows, I can reach all the way around the entire engine. No troubles at all. This is an exotic car, and this is 10 times easier to work on than an Audi. Let's go back over to the Audi and look. I'm going to take this off. There's the fans and there's the engine, literally 1 inch apart from one another.
Okay, Richard, can you get your hands in there?
Nope. No one can.
How do you get in there?
You have to pull the front bumper off. Your water pump goes out. Your alternator, which is liquid cooled on this, goes out. There's lots of hoses and coolant necks and things on the front of the motor that require the whole front bumper to come off. The oxygen sensors on this car, and as well as the starter, are engine out. Now the starter, it has been done by folks in the car, but it was a nightmare. For people that I've known that have done it, they almost said they were just about ready to pull the engine because it was so hard. They were getting so angry, so mad. The oxygen sensors are on the exhaust manifolds, and they are not accessible in the car. You can't get to them. It's an engine out job. $100 oxygen sensors, and pull the engine out to get to them. Now, I'm not here to downplay this car. I think they're an awesome car. I like them. There are times that I really wish I had my old one back. And if I was a banker or a lawyer or something, and I just did work on the side, and I could still do the level of work that I do, I would own another one. But being that I have a shop to run and I work all week on cars and cars and cars. The last thing I want to do every 2 or 3 weekends is have my Audi apart and the front bumper off over and over. I got tired of that, so I finally sold it. And I just didn't want to pay those repair bills. The amount of money it takes to maintain this engine is Lamborghini money. And there's just no way around that. It's truly Lamborghini money. Every time something goes wrong, it's $2 grand, $2 grand, $1 grand, $3 grand, $5 grand. It's really, really expensive to own this car, or an S8. It has the same motor. But when everything's in top shape and everything's repaired on these cars and the exhaust is opened up like the one that I had in the clip that you saw, they are an amazing car. The exhaust is very intoxicating, the noise of it, the sound of it. It's just absolutely beautiful to drive. It's kind of a dichotomy. It's so fun to own. They're really awesome cars. They're fast. It's 4 doors. It can carry your family around. It has basically an exotic engine, but the repair costs are so high. The reason why I did this video is if you guys are in the market for one of these, I'd say go for it. Go ahead and buy one. They're awesome. Just make sure you've budgeted the money to maintain it. And hopefully you're doing the work yourself and you can save quite a bit of money to keep it going. It's just like I said a couple videos ago about buying cars really cheap and expecting just to put a small amount in. This would be a car that you're not going to get by putting 500 bucks into it and be back on the road, or have a perfect running car. This car takes thousands of dollars. This is a car that you have to pay to play. You really do. But when you do pay, it is excellent fun to play with this car. It is a really awesome car. The guy's going to bring this car back that owns this at a future date. We're going to continue down the line of getting this thing right, making sure everything is as it should be. It's just not a good time right now to put that kind of money into this car. And I totally don't blame him. I fully understand it. This is not the time to be burning through $4 grand. So,
Car Wizard, will it hurt anything for him to delay the repair?
right now, like when it's cold, the check engine light flashes. It could possibly hurt the catalytic converters. But when it does warm up, it does stop doing it for the most part. It can still feel it a little bit, but it's just going to continue to get worse. That's the thing, the carbon issue. There's going to be more cylinders starting to misfire as you drive it more and more and more. It may be that he just has to drive short distances, or he doesn't drive it very much until he gets to a point where he's ready to put out the money to fix this. But I couldn't argue with him when he told me that, this, like I said, this just isn't the time to do this. And I understand. I get it. So speaking of Lambos, let's take a look at the one that I have in the shop right now.
Car Wizard, where are you at?
I'm at the Lamborghini.
No, we don't see you. We're looking there.
Oh, here I am. This is Hoovie's 2006 Murcielago. Here in the next week, we're going to pull this transmission out. You can see it behind me. So we'll be pulling this transmission out here pretty soon. This is the reason why this car is in the shop. Look how much had to come out to get to it. This isn't a car that you can pull the transmission on separate from the engine. You have to pull the engine first. Okay, now that I'm out of the way, you can see the transmission a little better. First gear in that transmission is completely stripped out. If you check out Hoovie's video on this car when he purchased it or first brought it here, there's literally teeth that come out of the, when we drain the oil, there's literally teeth that come out of it. Teeth from first gear. The transmission is shot, and the cost to rebuild that is astronomical. Cheaper to put a good used one in, and that's what we're going to be doing. We actually have a good transmission here to go in it. So thanks to you guys for following along. I thought you guys would like to see what's going on with this car. Maybe you could guess what's wrong with it. And then the truth of the matter of what does go wrong with these cars and what it takes to get them right. I hope you guys are staying safe and staying healthy in this situation that we're in. I hope that it's over soon. I know that we all are hoping that it's over soon. But until then, if you want to check out what kind of tools I use and write up a list of things you'd like to purchase, check out my Amazon affiliates page. And also, if you haven't hit the subscribe button already, go ahead and do that now. We got many more cool videos to come. And again, thanks for watching.